Back when the FIA was still in the process of designing the ADU system, Toto Wolff made a comment that, at the time, sounded like nothing more than routine caution. You don't want to allow an ADO to a team that suddenly leapfrogs the competition. It was a reasonable and fair point. The entire purpose of the system is to help struggling manufacturers close the gap gradually, not to hand them a single upgrade so significant that it completely flips the competitive order overnight. At that moment, nobody paid much attention to the remark. Then Barcelona happened. Hamilton qualified 4/10 faster than Russell through the middle sector, the corners, on a lap where he was clearly managing energy rather than pushing flat out at maximum pace. He ultimately lost the lap entirely on the straight, where Ferrari's engine simply could not match the performance level of the Mercedes. Russell himself openly admitted that Hamilton should have taken pole position. Wolff agreed publicly as well, stating that the chassis performance was already there. The only thing standing between Ferrari and genuine race-winning pace on every circuit, not just Monaco and Barcelona, was roughly 20 horsepower. Now that engine upgrade has been officially confirmed, Ferrari's first ADO-supported power unit revision is set to arrive at the Austrian Grand Prix in 2 weeks, brought forward from its original Spa target after the development program progressed faster than initially expected. Combustion chamber changes, a revised turbocharger, and a slight reduction in the straight-line deficit that has been the most discussed weakness of the SF26 throughout the entire season are all part of the update. If even half of that 20 horsepower gap is recovered at the Red Bull Ring, the team that already dominates in the corners will stop losing crucial time on the straights, and Wolff's warning from months ago, the one about a team suddenly leapfrogging the field, begins to look far less like cautious speculation and far more like an accurate prediction. Ferrari's two-phase engine development program was not originally structured around Austria. According to the Italian outlet Autoracer, the first development step had initially been scheduled for Spa-Francorchamps, the Belgian circuit that comes well after the summer break. However, process optimization within Maranello's engine department pushed that timeline significantly forward. The current objective is to introduce the first package as early as the Austrian Grand Prix at Spielberg. That acceleration matters more than it might initially appear. Power unit development under the 2026 freeze regulations is not simply a matter of choosing to go faster. Every single component change must be validated extensively on the dyno, homologated through the FIA approval process, and then manufactured at scale before it can be fitted to a race car. Compressing that timeline by what amounts to an entire summer's worth of development cycles strongly suggests that Ferrari's engine department either discovered a more direct and efficient path to achieving the gains they were targeting than originally planned, or concluded that the competitive situation demanded a level of urgency that the original Spa timeline simply did not reflect. Given what happened in Barcelona, a maiden victory that the team itself described as clear proof that the chassis can compete at the very front, yet undercut by a power deficit large enough to cost pole position by just 64 thousandths of a second, the second explanation appears far more likely. Ferrari saw exactly how close they were to genuine front-row contention on pure merit, and just as importantly, they saw exactly what was still standing directly in their way. The two-stage program remains fully intact. The first package, the one scheduled to arrive in Austria, specifically targets the combustion chamber and the turbocharger. The second, more substantial intervention is expected after the summer break, most likely around September, with a deeper and more detailed focus on reliability and thermal efficiency improvements. Bringing the first phase forward does not alter the total scope of the program itself. What it changes is how much of the remaining season Ferrari will be able to compete with the upgraded package already installed in the car. If you strip away the speculation and concentrate only on the two components Ferrari's engineers are actively modifying, the picture becomes much clearer. The combustion chamber is the first area of focus. The objective, according to several Italian sources closely tracking the development program, is to improve efficiency at higher engine speeds while also reducing energy losses under sustained load conditions. In a turbocharged hybrid power unit, the geometry of the combustion chamber determines how completely the fuel burns, how much usable energy is extracted from each individual combustion cycle, and how much heat is ultimately wasted instead of being converted into mechanical power or harvested electrically through the MGU systems. Even small geometric adjustments, including changes to the chamber shape, refinements to the piston crown design, and improvements in how fuel and air mix before ignition, compound across thousands of combustion cycles per minute into meaningful and measurable horsepower gains. The turbocharger represents the second key component, and the level of detail involved here is precise enough to truly matter. Ferrari is modifying the number of compressor vanes and adjusting the angle of the impeller, the rotating element responsible for compressing incoming air before it reaches the combustion chamber. Critically, the overall size of the turbocharger remains unchanged. That detail is not incidental or minor. Ferrari's hot engine philosophy depends in part on maintaining a deliberately compact turbo architecture, which allows the cooling system to be packaged more efficiently than those of its rivals, creating aerodynamic advantages in other areas of the car. Altering the fundamental size of the turbo would compromise those packaging benefits. By changing the vane count and impeller angle within the same physical constraints, Ferrari can improve airflow delivery at higher RPM without sacrificing the structural and aerodynamic advantages provided by the hot engine concept. The trade-off involved is very real. Optimizing the turbocharger for improved high RPM airflow typically comes at the cost of some low-end throttle response and reduced acceleration out of slower corners, an area where Ferrari has actually remained competitive throughout the season, partly due to how the SF26's mechanical platform effectively manages traction. Ferrari's engineers appear to have judged that compromise acceptable, prioritizing gains at high RPM and high speed, precisely where Hamilton lost his qualifying lap in Barcelona, while accepting a smaller loss in an area where the car was already strong enough to absorb it. Perhaps the most interesting and revealing detail in the entire Austria upgrade story is not what Ferrari is changing, but what it is choosing not to change. Faced with an estimated 20 horsepower deficit and a clear technical pathway toward more conventional solutions, Ferrari's engineers are instead doubling down on the unconventional engineering philosophy that originally created that deficit in the first place. Ferrari's power unit operates at higher temperatures than those of its rivals by design. The use of a steel cylinder head, rather than the more commonly used aluminium, allows the engine to tolerate combustion chamber pressures beyond what many competitors can reliably sustain. Higher sustained pressure during combustion translates into more energy extracted from each cycle, but it also results in increased heat that must be carefully managed and controlled. According to the latest reports, Ferrari's evolved engine specification for the second half of the season could push the intake air temperature entering the intercooler as high as 110 degrees Celsius, compared to the more conventional 70 to 80 degrees Celsius range that is typically considered optimal for combustion efficiency. At first glance, that figure sounds counterintuitive, because cooler and denser air is generally associated with stronger and more efficient combustion. Ferrari's approach, however, is based less on pure thermodynamic optimization and more on structural and packaging advantages. Running the engine at higher temperatures allows the cooling system itself to be smaller, tighter, and more compact, which in turn frees up valuable space elsewhere within the car. That additional space can then be converted into aerodynamic gains through improved side pod shaping, cleaner underfloor airflow, or more efficient overall bodywork design. In theory, the horsepower lost by operating at higher temperatures is indirectly recovered through aerodynamic efficiency that a more conventionally cooled engine layout simply would not allow. It is a genuinely unconventional philosophy in an era where most manufacturers are converging toward very similar cooling concepts, and the fact that Ferrari is pushing this idea further rather than stepping back after a season of being down on power strongly suggests a deep internal confidence that the concept itself works, even if they have not yet fully unlocked its total potential. The Austria upgrade becomes the next critical data point in determining whether that confidence is justified in real-world performance. Subscribe to F1 Perspective, because the engine story only becomes more compelling from this point forward. When you connect the Austria engine upgrade to what actually unfolded in Barcelona, the stakes become immediately clear. Hamilton's qualifying lap revealed a 4/10 advantage through the corners, combined with a 64-millisecond deficit overall, a gap that was entirely explained by straight-line speed limitations. His race performance advantage came by nearly 20 seconds, built on superior tire management and chassis performance that the new front wing and floor package made possible. Every element of that result that depended on aerodynamics and mechanical grip already favored Ferrari, leaving horsepower as the only missing piece. If Ferrari manages to close even half of the 20 horsepower deficit at Austria, which is the stated target of the ADO program, the entire competitive calculation shifts precisely at the point where Hamilton lost his pole lap in Barcelona. Less time lost on the straights means the 4/10 gain through the corners carries further into the final sector, and a driver who was just 64 thousandths away from pole with the current engine could realistically be on pole, or extremely close to it, with even a partial improvement. This is exactly the scenario Wolff warned about before the season began, a single ADU intervention significant enough to disrupt the competitive order rather than gradually reduce the gap. Whether the Austria upgrade reaches that level of impact remains something that must be proven on track rather than assumed on paper, because 10 horsepower on its own is meaningful but not necessarily transformative. What makes it potentially decisive is the platform it is being added to, because Ferrari is not introducing this engine upgrade to a car that is otherwise lacking competitiveness. Instead, they are adding it to a chassis that has already demonstrated the ability to outcorner the championship leaders on pure merit. When you combine a car that dominates the technical sectors with an engine that no longer loses ground in the power-sensitive sectors, the result is not incremental improvement but a fundamental shift in competitiveness. It creates a scenario where a 7-time world champion at 41 years old becomes a genuine title contender in the second half of the season, driving what could become Ferrari's first true championship-winning car of the modern era. Drop a comment and ask yourself whether 10 horsepower is enough to make Hamilton a real championship contender. 2 weeks from now, Ferrari arrives at the Red Bull Ring with a different engine specification than the one that secured victory in Barcelona, featuring combustion chamber revisions aimed at improving efficiency at high engine speeds, along with a turbocharger that retains the same external dimensions but incorporates reworked internal components, including additional compressor vanes and a revised impeller angle designed to deliver airflow more effectively at the RPM ranges where Ferrari has consistently been losing time throughout the season. The hot engine philosophy is being pushed further rather than abandoned, reinforcing the belief that increased thermal aggression can be translated into aerodynamic freedom elsewhere on the car. None of these changes alter what Barcelona already demonstrated, which is that the chassis is fundamentally competitive, the aerodynamic package is effective, and Hamilton, based on the data, was the fastest driver on track for most of his qualifying lap. What Austria will ultimately test is whether the final remaining variable, horsepower, improves enough to allow all those existing strengths to translate into actual results rather than being neutralized on the straights. Wolff's earlier warning about an ADU upgrade large enough to disrupt the order was originally intended as a caution to the FIA, a reminder to carefully regulate the system. But 2 races later it reads more like a precise description of the exact scenario Ferrari and Mercedes are about to confront. Whether 10 horsepower proves sufficient or insufficient will not be confirmed through statements or press releases, but rather through measurable data at the speed trap at the end of the Red Bull Ring's long uphill straight during qualifying on a Saturday 2 weeks from now, because that is exactly where the next chapter of this story will be written.